Today is the first time we are talking about cancer on the show. It's a topic that women going through menopause are concerned about. So I sought out an expert to help guide us in the world of nutrition for cancer. Dr. Krystle Zuniga is a clinician. She's an educator, a scientist, and science communicator in Austin, Texas, that's in the US, with over 14 years of experience in nutrition, and specifically nutrition for people who have cancer. She completed her PhD in nutritional sciences and dietetic internship at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Then she did her postdoctoral training in the Department of Kinesiology and Community Health at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. After that, she became an assistant professor of nutrition and foods at Texas State University, where her laboratory examined the relationship between diet quality, physical activity, and cognitive function in young adults, breast cancer survivors, and older adults. Dr. Zuniga then held a clinical role and faculty appointment at the Live Strong Cancer Institutes of the Dell Medical School at University of Texas at Austin. And through all her experiences, Dr. Zuniga saw that there was a gap in nutrition support for cancer survivors, both during and after cancer treatment. So as a board-certified oncology dietitian and owner of the private practice and social media account Cancer Nutrition HQ, she decided to combat misinformation, share the latest research in nutrition and cancer, and translate the science into everyday actions cancer survivors can take to support their health and quality of life with nutrition. In addition to her private practice, she is an assistant professor of instruction in the Department of Nutritional Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin, and board member of Moving Beyond Cancer Collaborative, a nonprofit that provides accessible integrative oncology health and wellness services. And before we start our interview, we have to read the fancy disclaimer. This podcast represents the opinions of Dr. Krystle Zuniga. The content here is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as medical advice. So please consult your healthcare professional for any medical questions. So now, without further ado, let's meet Dr. Krystle Zuniga. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me today. Look forward to our conversation.
So our topic today asks this question: can nutrition cure cancer? There is a lot of information floating around internet about certain foods or nutrients that cure us of not only cancer, but many other illnesses. And sometimes the messages are in conflict with each other. So tell us, what is going on here? And are there really any foods that can cure cancer?
Yeah, I think it's really important to start off with explaining what cancer is. We talk about cancer like it is one thing, but cancer is an umbrella term for over 100 different diseases, right? It arises from a single cell that has mutations that then keeps dividing. So it can happen in any cell in the body. And so you have to understand that there is not one disease, one dietary approach is not going to cure or treat such a complex array of different diseases, essentially. And I know we'll dig into that a little bit more there, but it's important to just understand that cancer is a very complex disease to treat. It's essentially a normal cell that has been mutated and gone rogue. So it's using a lot of our same biological mechanisms as a normal cell would for division and growth, and it's just gotten out of control. So although it likes to be simplified that this one food or this one dietary plan is what's going to cure cancer, a whole umbrella of different diseases, it really is not that simple.
So one of your missions is to combat misinformation, and so many people are getting health advice from Instagram and Facebook, and some of these people are doctors, or they appear to be qualified to give advice, and so it's very easy to believe what they're saying, and maybe there's truth to it or half truth. Or how do we figure out who to believe and who not to believe, and apply it to ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's what makes misinformation and disinformation so challenging to identify, is like there can be some half truths in it, and and I get asked this a lot, like, what about this? It's like, well, this part's true, but then this is an exaggeration, and that's not really how it works. And I think it's really important then to kind of start off with that person's qualifications. There's plenty of people out there who don't have any medical training or advanced degrees in that field. But as you did mention, there are people who do, and that makes it even more difficult to identify if what they're saying is true. See if they are citing research. If they're saying something happens, do they have any references to what they're saying? Are they the only one that is saying this? That's also a big red flag when they're the only one and all the other evidence is saying something else. That one person is not the holder of this special information. And then also think, like, if they are giving a lot of misinformation, and creating a lot of fear, are they then also trying to sell you their own solution to it? And if they can sell you fear, then they can sell you a solution to that, information or fear as well. So all that to say, it is really more challenging. There actually has been a little bit of research on cancer misinformation, and have found that misinformation gets more engagement than scientific misinformation. And that a lot of these videos, there's one analysis, particularly with the prostate cancer, found that over 70% of the videos that they surveyed had misinformation in there. So honestly,
Wow.
like the odds are that some of the information you're finding online is not correct. And I wish there was an easy answer to it, but people just have to be a little more discerning and skeptical.
Yeah. And that's really hard if you don't even have the scientific background in some of these studies, because we know that for every study that shows, I don't know, red wine is good for you, there are studies that say it's bad for you. And so gets very confusing. And then if you really were to dig into the study, I mean, I think you really need to learn how to read studies sometimes, because it is a lot of jargon and vocabulary that people may not be aware of. And two, then there is, how do we look in deeper into a paper and say, oh, is this funded by, the Red Wine Society or something like that, and find out that actually there is some bias there. And because we know any scientist or researcher can just flip the numbers and the data and create a research that is showing in favor or against, or whatever it is that they're arguing. And that is really, really hard. And that's why it's so easy to just watch a quick little video, 15 seconds or 1 minute, and you get, and in language that you understand. It's a really hard thing to combat. But I think what you're doing and what I'm trying to do as well is just to empower people with information. And that's why I ask you the question, if you can read a study, go back into it, see if they're selling something, and not say that's necessarily a bad. Maybe there's a great book that they're promoting and it's fabulous, but just to be a little skeptical. I think that's really important, and to dig a little bit deeper into your research, and then of course talk to your doctor about it, because your case may be different, because there may be true information and that holds true for that type of cancer or that type of person, but maybe not for you and your particular situation. So I think that's the best advice that someone can sort of take on. And I'm sure there's probably many other great clues that we can have, but moving on. So the short answer is no, not one food can cure your cancer. And of course there's many things, but what about foods that can lower our risk if we haven't had cancer yet? Is there anything out there that we should know about?
Yes, there's a lot of great research in this area. And actually another survey done that found that less than half of Americans were aware of this research about the relationship between lifestyle factors and cancer risk. So the American Institute for Cancer Research and the World Cancer Research Fund, nonprofit organization that over the last 30 years, they have put out 3 different reports, expert reports, where they synthesize the research and bring expert panels in to grade the strength of the evidence. And actually over all these different expert reports, they've come to very similar conclusions over time, and the evidence just keeps stacking up that there are lifestyle factors associated with reduced risk of multiple cancers. And so when we talk about the dietary related ones, doesn't seem all that novel. It does really align with a lot of our recommendations we're already giving for healthy dietary patterns, but it's limiting processed foods and sugar sweetened beverages, limiting red meat and avoiding processed meats, avoiding alcohol is another one, but also consuming more whole grains, fruits and vegetables in the diet to help get more fiber in the diet. And then other lifestyle factors include, physical activity, maintaining a healthy body weight, not using supplements for cancer prevention purposes, actually, and then breastfeeding if that pertains to that individual. But essentially, they came up with 10 cancer prevention recommendations. And it really is encouraging a more plant-forward diet that's limited in processed foods, sugar-sweetened beverages, and alcohol.
So interesting.
And people, go ahead.
Interesting. You mentioned supplements too. What kind of supplements are people taking? Anti-cancer, top supplements. I don't know what people are out. I love supplements in general for myself. I'm a supplement queen. I was trying different stuff, but I'm curious to know, what are people taking out there to lower their risk of cancer or risk of cancer? Yeah.
So this really came from this recommendation that be aware of, like the CARROT trial, and they were giving supplementation of beta carotene and vitamin A, and they actually found an increased risk of lung cancer in those that were smokers. So there seemed to be some interaction there with carotenoids, and then high amounts of this oxidative stress from smoking actually increased the risk of lung cancer. Then there was the SELECT trial. This was actually using vitamin E and selenium for prevention of prostate cancer. And it's early in the morning, so I'm trying to remember. It's either vitamin E or selenium that is actually associated with an increased risk of prostate cancer. So they found that using high doses of supplements that people are not deficient in could actually increase risk of particular cancers. So that recommendation is like, we have a lot to learn about supplements. And once you start using them at high doses, they might have some type of pharmaceutical. They might increase the risk for some individuals. So that's kind of where that recommendation came from. I will say there is some newer research now with vitamin D. And vitamin D supplementation and maintaining adequate levels of vitamin D have actually been associated with lower risks of many cancers. So it will be interesting when they always do continuous updates. They're continually looking at the research if they'll reevaluate and maybe say that recommendation a little bit differently as we learn more.
Oh, how interesting. Yeah, I've heard of some people being treated for cancer in a little bit of alternative ways. And I do remember them mentioning high dose vitamin C and high dose melatonin, like crazy doses. I don't even know where you buy these things. I don't know if it's intravenous or what, but this was through like, doctor or a clinic or something like that. And these people weren't doing this on their own, but I do remember hearing stuff like that. Is there any research behind this that's valid?
I know there's a little bit of limited research with like IV vitamin C that some cancers have used, or cancer types it's been used in, but again, not alone as a therapy. There's actually a story a few years ago about someone was receiving IV turmeric, and we know turmeric and curcumin that has had a lot of excitement about it. That was dangerous. That individual died from taking IV turmeric. So we have to be careful about these things used in very high doses. Are they pure? Should they be actually delivered in that way? And yeah, there is actually a little bit with melatonin and breast cancer. But again, none of this has been used as a evidence-based way to treat cancer alone.
Yes. Okay. So yes, that is super interesting. And that kind of goes back to, yes, nutrition alone is not going to be a lifesaver for your cancer and cancer treatments, whatever that you're getting. But I'm wondering, so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your protocols, because you work with patients and you put probably everyone on a different protocol. But generally speaking, if people are trying to lower their risk of cancer versus those who actually already have cancer or post cancer, are there different nutritional protocols for these people?
Great question. So, yes, I talked about we want to promote those guidelines for the cancer prevention. But when someone's going through treatment, we would also like to encourage a very similar dietary approach. So, there's been some more research looking at dietary patterns during cancer. There's a lot less research compared to prevention. But what we have seen as a theme of during cancer is those that have a more anti-inflammatory dietary pattern, more plant-forward, have better overall mortality. So that's exciting research. Also, some exciting research has come out about fiber and more of a Mediterranean dietary pattern and better response to immunotherapy. So as we're learning some more research about how someone's diet might actually affect their prognosis and outcomes, we're seeing kind of the same theme of what we'd be preventing or promoting for prevention.
Mm.
But with this understanding that once someone is in cancer treatment, there's a lot more barriers to nutrition, a lot more barriers. So I could have two patients with colorectal cancer, same stage, but the way that it's impacting them is different. So we might need to make some modifications to help them better tolerate their diet, have less severe side effects. We have someone with constipation or someone with diarrhea, and the foods that I'm going to recommend and encourage are going to be different. So say, of course, like baseline, I want someone with a very healthful overall dietary pattern, but we need to make adjustments based on how they're tolerating their treatment. And that also during treatment, definitely want to encourage more protein and adequate protein.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to talk about the protein because I have a
Yeah.
big question on that. But before we do, I want to go back. So it sounds like actually I would add to what you're saying. I'm guessing, and correct me if I'm wrong, that once you do have the cancer and you're going through a treatment, you're probably on some medication, and then there's maybe certain foods that interact with the medication. But many people, well, the first question I ask many of the people I know who have been diagnosed with cancer is, are there any nutritional guidelines? Are you supposed to be eating certain things or not eating certain things? And across the board, everyone I've so far says, no, I do whatever I want. What are your thoughts on that?
So I often hear that that's some of the nutrition advice they're given from a healthcare provider is eat whatever you want. Now, maybe at face value, it's like, we need you to maintain your weight because we know that malnutrition is associated with adverse outcomes. Like that is very well understood, that unintentional weight loss and that cancer cachexia itself is dangerous to a patient. So maybe at face value, it's like, hey, we don't want you to lose weight. But we should be encouraging more of these foods that could help an individual have better quality of life and perhaps even impact their clinical outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And also, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that also, I work in a lot of patients with GI cancers. And so maybe if they had part of their pancreas removed, like, no, high fat foods like ice cream are going to not agree with you very well. Or you've developed lactose intolerance from, a side effect of your chemo. We should limit dairy in your diet or change the type of dairy. So I don't like that at face value, eat whatever you want, because I feel like one, it undermines the value of nutrition. And two, it's typically not paired with that professional nutrition support that I truly believe all individuals going through cancer deserve to have.
Is it because the doctors don't have training in nutrition or some other
Yeah,
reason?
I don't want the oncologist to like know everything about the physical therapy and your social support needs, and like they can't be everything. You want them to know what's the best therapy and keeping up with all the latest therapies and plans. But I feel like they should be able to refer to dietitians. There's actually, here in the US, there was a survey a few years ago that found that there's one dietitian for every 2,300 cases of cancer surveyed at cancer centers. So we're seeing that, and this included our National Cancer Institute designated cancer centers. They had quite a variety of different cancer centers, but often they had maybe a part-time dietitian or a PRN dietitian, and they really have to, with that ratio, kind of just streamline or really focus on who are the patients at greatest risk, and they're the ones that get to see a dietitian. So it seems like more of a reactive approach in a lot of these cases. So I feel like it's a lot that they just don't have a lot of time with a patient, and they might not even have a dietitian as part of their cancer center. And so then patients don't get that access to information, which I feel is like has left a huge wide open window door for misinformation to flood in and fill that gap.
Well, hopefully this will change soon in the future, because it's such a big gap and so necessary, and people are confused, and I could be doing more harm than good with some of the information they're getting online or on a podcast, right? Even I tell people, be a little skeptical with my podcast. Really, you should, because we don't know who you are. We don't know your situation. And we're not giving medical advice here. So, really, I think just this is for informational purposes, and that's why you take it to your doctor. I want to ask you about, go a little bit back to alcohol, because we're talking very much to a woman going through this menopause transition. So 40s, 50s, 60s, and maybe their mothers as well. This is sort of the spectrum of women we're talking to. And alcohol seems to be a favorite and something we don't really want to let go. But I know we try to educate women going through this transition that alcohol can be disruptive to your hormones, and which are already out of balance. And there's a lot of detoxification that needs to be done, and the hormones get affected. So we really need to, I think, to be aware. And I don't like to demonize any kinds of foods at all, but when my mother was going through breast cancer treatment, this is 30 years ago, unfortunately she passed away. I do remember her for a while drinking 1 glass of red wine a day, because of what she read in the media. The time was that red wine was good for your health. And I'm wondering, how has the science changed since then? And what does a woman who does like to have her glass of wine or gin and tonic or whatever it is about that, and either cancer prevention or getting the cancer treatment, how does that affect the even post and pre-risk, pre, during, and post cancer?
Yeah, you bring up that research that got a whole lot of attention about red wine being associated with mortality and cardiovascular disease. But when we look at more specifically cancer, and a lot of the new research that has come out and really supported this is, it's going to go back. The American Institute for Cancer Research and even the American Cancer Society are now saying, like, there really is no safe amount of alcohol, that it all is going to increase the risk. And we definitely see like this J-shaped curve, that there's a lower increase in risk at that low to moderate doses, but it's not a no increase in risk. And so people need to be aware of that. And definitely with heavy drinking, we see that even more exponential increase in risk. And alcohol itself has been associated with several cancers, liver cancer, more obviously, but also any cancers of the oral pharynx, where alcohol is touching, right? Colorectal cancer, but also breast cancer. And you mentioned a couple of reasons why that it could impact the detoxification systems, estrogen metabolism, alcohol itself, its byproduct, acetaldehyde, direct carcinogen there. So the reality is that there's no safe dose, but to understand that a lot of things that we do in our life carry some type of risk. So I tell patients, like, this is up to you. I'll discuss the data for you. All of this is always autonomy. I present information, you decide what you want to do with that information. But when it comes to cancer risk, it has been determined that there really is no safe dose, and that all of it is going to increase risk of cancer. Cardiovascular disease is kind of a different story, but it's like, well, what are you trying to really prevent here? What are you most concerned about?
Absolutely. Thank you for clearing that up. Okay. So that brings me to other things that it sounds like a little bit like Dr. Valter Longo in terms of protein. And Dr. Valter Longo is just, in case you don't know who he is, he's been named by Time Magazine as one of the top 10 most influential people in health. And he's the father of the fasting mimicking diet. He's done extensive research into caloric restriction and fasting and keeping protein very, very low until you're about 65, and then you increase. And he does this to show that, to lower our risk of cancer, as well as to combat cancer cells. Dr. Longo was one of my professors when I was doing my master's of gerontology at USC, but by the end of the course, all the students were protein phobes, and we all started practicing intermittent fasting and keeping our calories low. and and I just
Mhm.
want to explain a little bit to people the background behind this, because what Dr. Longo generally says is that explains that cancer cells have these disruptions in their signaling and metabolic pathways that lead to this increase in glucose uptake and a change in the mitochondrial function, and are able to avoid these sort of anti-growth signals so that they can proliferate. And he believes that fasting and fasting mimicking diets, which are just basically it's a fast but with really minimal amounts of food, and he thinks that this will benefit the sort of normal healthy cells, and it'll hurt the cancer cells. And this mechanism of action that he talks about is to reduce IGF-1, which is growth factor, things that grow, and then to lower insulin and glucose, as well as increase IGF-BP1, something like that, and these ketone bodies. And this creates an environment that forces the cancer cells to rely more on metabolites and factors that are limited in the blood, and then that will kill the cancer cells. Just to give you guys there is a mechanism of action that he totally goes through. And so he makes his argument. He's really convincing, and not only from his personal research, but it's also coming from epidemiological studies, these model organism studies, longitudinal studies, clinical trials, and then he studies these centenarian population. These are people where sort of areas where people are living over the age of 100. And he has such a compelling argument. I mean, we're all convinced of it. And it makes us fearful of protein. But what are your thoughts on this research, and how does that apply to people that you're actually treating who have cancer? I know that was really
But
long-winded,
thank you
and
for
maybe
wrapping up
people.
like the mechanism. No, I think it's important to understand, because people just hear, oh, I heard fasting's good. And it's like, let's talk about what is he trying to say about it and why could it be good? And then let's look at like the bigger picture here. Like, it would be nice if we could simplify cancer metabolism into, if you just impact IGF-1, then cancer goes away and you never get cancer, or just give it ketones and that's going to starve all cancers. As I talked about, cancer can occur in any part of the body. So just like our kidney is using fuel a little bit differently than our liver, differently than our brain, we also have to consider that where these cells are going to impact their metabolic fuel availability, right? But if we talk about, during cancer, what do we have as far as intermittent fasting or the fasting mimicking diet in relation to during cancer treatment? Very, very little. I know there's a lot going on right now. He does have some active clinical trials, which are going to be exciting to see, because I want to just start up there. Like, I have an open mind. I want to see more research in the area of how can we use nutrition to support outcomes, reduce side effects. But what we have right now is not that convincing to me. We do have very limited trials. He did run one trial with breast cancer, and actually less than half of the sample was able to do 2 cycles of the fasting mimicking diet. And it's really only about, I think it's five days fasting
5
around the
days.
time around the time that they're receiving chemotherapy. So very low adherence. So it's only going to be as good as what people can do. You can,
Yeah.
when a rodent's in a cage, you can make it do anything from lifelong for many months, and you're going to see those really strong effects. But once you put it in the model of a human in real life, what are they able to adhere to? And if they can't adhere to it, is that actually going to give that same amount of outcomes? So
Yeah.
there has been a little bit with maybe potentially reducing the toxicity of chemo if it is around that time of a chemotherapy cycle, but we don't have outcomes yet related to better prognosis or survival when it comes to that. But I know they're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's going to be targeting that IGF-1 pathway, there has not been a whole lot of success with IGF-1 receptor agonist as therapies in cancer. And what that is really highlighting there is that cancer cells are using different growth factors to stimulate growth. Like, okay, you can shut down this pathway, but it's got other ways to signal growth. So with IGF-1 receptor agonists, there hasn't been a whole lot of success. And it definitely is not something that could be used alone, because we know that cancer cells can find their way. Then
Well,
we could also try, go ahead.
he describes that as he always says cancer cells are really stupid. And the healthy cells are really smart. So his idea was when you fast and you starve the body or you starve the cells, the stupid cancer cells don't actually find a way. They'll find many, many ways based on any kind of food you actually can give the body. But if you have nothing, that's when the sort of, I guess, the autophagy, that cellular cleanup and recycling process happens. And then, wow, these healthy cells get bigger, better, and stronger, and they can find a way much faster or better than the stupid cancer cells. If I recall correctly, that's sort of how it was explained. So
Yeah. I would say that cancer cells are very smart, and that's what makes them so difficult to treat. Is that's why we see treatment resistance. It starts selectively because within a tumor, it's not all of the same cell because it's replicating so quickly. It's acquiring all these different mutations, and it's very messy. I'd say not that they are dumb, but they're very messy and acquire all these different mutations. They have a very messy vascular system because they're just dividing so quickly. So the cancer cells that are getting more oxygen on the outside of the tumor can maybe do a little more fat metabolism and ketone utilization versus those that aren't getting a lot of aerobic capacity, might rely a little more on glucose. So we see even within a tumor, there's a heterogeneity of the cells, a lot of different mutations required. And that just shows like in cancer treatment, how they have to target multiple pathways, because if you just target one pathway, you're selecting out then the cells that don't require that pathway. But I'll have to say, like, I think that fasting could be used in something maybe in conjunction with another therapy. And that also, we're kind of looking at nutrition. This is another area of research that's starting to come up is if you know the mutations in that tumor, then you can use an approach, a therapeutic approach that can target that pathway that is mutated. So I think there just needs to be a little more precision in using these types of dietary protocols. There has been some companies out there that have like these therapeutic foods that are limited in a particular amino acid. So there is definitely active research area of if we know the mutations and kind of the limitations of this cancer, can we use a specific nutrition approach to target that pathway and then have another therapy that targets a different pathway? Just like war, right? You want to come at it from all sides.
Exactly. And have the most effective approach. And what I do remember, and I'm not sure if you found this study or not, I mentioned it to you earlier before we were recording, is this research he presented to me. I will never forget it. And I have a feeling it was done with mice. And because he does a lot of research with rodents and animals, and the setup were that you would get a mouse with cancer, and then you'd try to treat it with chemotherapy or not, or just fasting. So I believe it was a 24-hour fast, like full on water fast, pre the chemotherapy, and then see the outcome. And there were other groups where it was just fasting with no chemotherapy, and then just the chemotherapy without the fasting. And what he had found was if it was just fasting, well, the tumors would shrink, but then they would actually grow back again. Same thing would happen with the chemotherapy. But when he combined the chemotherapy with the fasting, the 24-hour fast before, the tumors would shrink and they weren't coming back. And I was searching for this study, and I just couldn't find it. I don't know if you found this study, if you have any background on it, and any thoughts.
That's kind of the mechanism of why they were supporting, like maybe this could at least reduce the side effects in someone receiving chemotherapy, because when you're limiting fuel availability, said our healthy cells are like, okay, we need to clean up here. We don't have a lot of fuel. Let's slow down replication. Versus cancer cells are like, we're going to keep going, and they'll take the fuel and they'll keep dividing. And how chemotherapy works is that the rapidly dividing cells take up these agents. It damages the DNA, different mechanisms depending on the therapy. And then these cancer cells can't repair that, and then they die. So if we can slow down the replication of the healthy cells, then they're going to take up less of that chemotherapy, then we might have less side effects. And that allows for more of that chemotherapeutic agent to be taken up by the cancer cells that just keep dividing regardless of fuel availability. So mechanistically, yes, that's interesting, but we need to see that in our clinical trials.
with humans.
Yeah.
If that's really what it was. But I think it's interesting, and I guess it shows promise, and maybe there will be. And I think that's why he created the fasting mimicking diet, because obviously, like you said, who's going to adhere to this? And no doctor really wants to put their fast their patients. So that's why he's trying to move in with this. Well, you can eat, but you just have very minimal calories with the right macronutrients. And certainly his program is about a high fat and low carbohydrate, and like practically zero protein, very little protein in there. And he's so anti-protein. It really scared us all. What are your thoughts? Because he was saying, well, if you eat protein, and he made it, I think, quite clear, he does want you to eat low protein, meaning I think it was, I don't know, 0.3 grams per I don't know, per kilo. I can't remember exactly, but it was pretty low. And versus if you have cancer as well, just keep that really low. And because he really said, wow, it's dangerous to have these put in growth, something that's going to make your body, things in your body grow, right? That's why bodybuilders love to eat protein, and we're trying to eat more protein to make muscle growth. But if we're to have a cancer, he would say that's the last thing you want growing. So keep protein away. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so during cancer treatment, a really big challenge is keeping people's muscle on. There has been a lot of research showing that those that have lost muscle during cancer treatment have poor prognosis. That's been shown over and over again in a variety of populations, and that those that have more muscle at the start of treatment tend to have better outcomes because they're less frail, could be another approach there. And the understanding that during cancer treatment, there's a lot of systemic inflammation. That's very different than someone not receiving cancer treatment. It is very catabolic. One, the inflammation, also because there is so much inflammation, these acute phase proteins being made by the liver, that requires amino acids to make that, and it's coming from muscle. So we're seeing a lot of muscle breakdown. Also, this stress is like, we need more glucose. So actually it starts breaking down muscle again to provide those gluconeogenic precursors. So during cancer, we're seeing a lot of, it's very catabolic, significant amount of muscle loss in many individuals. And that is associated with poor prognosis. As far as protein intake during cancer treatment, the recommendation is anywhere from 1 to 1.5 grams. Those with cancer cachexia, so malnutrition, we're looking at 2 to 2.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. So very much different than what he's recommending. And there has been some research that suggests that about 1.5 grams per kilogram might be needed for someone to maintain their muscle during treatment. Then there has been a few studies that have come out, more than a couple, of looking at survival and risk of recurrence, and have found that in breast cancer, and this has been done in ovarian cancer, recently a paper just came out there, higher protein intakes associated with better survival. So it does, again, we can have mechanism, but then let's look at this particular population and have seen something a little bit different. So a little discordant there, and I think there needs to be more research on both ends to see, again, and also genetics and all this stuff that just adds, like, opens Pandora's box. It could be very selected about what populations more protein could provide benefit for versus where it might have a negative effect. But to kind of summarize all that, we see just more catabolic, seeing a lot of muscle loss. We want to prevent that muscle loss because it's associated with worse prognosis, more treatment toxicities. And then when we look at recurrence outcomes, we actually see something that shows protein to be a bit protective.
Amazing. Okay. That's it. So that makes sense. Certainly why I see cancer patients who I know of, they have this drink the doctor gives them called Ensure. And that's like it's a protein shake. But I often see a lot of sugar in there too. What are your thoughts on those drinks? And as well as, okay, let's say, and it makes sense that they're saying this, but is it better for a cancer patient to eat animal proteins versus plant proteins? Would you say eat both, or does it depend on the type of cancer?
Right. I mean, to start off like the Ensure and those oral nutrition supplements, one of my big reasons why I don't like them is that it's used in like, you're losing weight, drink Ensure. Like that is the only solution for preventing weight loss. And like, yes, they're easy, but say, and the way that I work with patients, many of them do not like it. Too sweet, very chemically taste, they tell me, because it has vitamins and minerals in there too. So they're like drinking a liquid multivitamin, doesn't settle well. Um, but to kind of link back there, oh, I lost myself in my talking about Ensure.
Ensure. Yeah, because I asked you after
Yeah.
Ensure. So you agree with me that it's probably not the best way to get in protein. And the other question, I
Oh,
said, well,
animal.
then, yeah, animal versus protein, animal versus
Yeah.
vegetable protein.
Yeah, absolutely. So I definitely like to encourage things like including soy products in the diet, tofu, edamame, tempeh, like beans, legumes. If they can get their calories and their protein through plant proteins, that's great because we are also getting fiber in there and all of these phytochemicals, antioxidants, anti-inflammatory compounds in plants. But that can be really challenging. If someone's only able to take a couple of bites of food, taking a couple of bites of beans is going to give us a lot less protein than a couple of bites of chicken breast, right? So there actually was more like an expert recommendations that came out that were encouraging a little more animal protein, a little more reliance on some animal proteins during cancer treatment to help meet those higher protein needs when someone is having a lot of difficulty and challenges with eating. Um, so it's definitely by individual. I like to focus more on plants because we're going to get a lot of other nutritional bang for our bite. But if it's challenging to get enough calories in, then doing something a little more animal based, you're going to get a lot more protein per gram. Oral nutrition supplements are not my first go-to. In fact, I have a lot more recipes and recommendations for smoothies where we can get a lot more nutrition in there than what Ensure and Boost and those types of products provide.
Do you have a recommended cookbook or website or Instagram
Ooh.
account where you have the recipes like this that somebody who's going through cancer can get inspired by?
So there are many, I did an Instagram post on this one a long time ago. I should probably bring that one up back of some of these books that I recommend. The Life Kitchen is one of them. Cooking for Cancer is another one. Um, there's just so many out there. There's some great
Oh,
resources, not coming to the top of my head. And I also do that for patients too. I do some meal planning, give them some ideas for smoothies and where we could get their fiber, their protein, some more plants in there through smoothies. But yeah, there's some great resources out there.
send me the links to either your post or some of these books, and we'll put them in the show notes for people to get started. Dr. Longo, he also wrote a book called The Longevity Diet, which I discovered after I wrote my cookbook, Eating for Longevity. And I'll have links to those books in the show notes too. But we both, Dr. Longo and I, propose eating low sugar, low refined carbohydrates. However, like his diet says had a lot of pasta and bread and rice, although in small amounts. But since I read the book Vital Signs of Cancer by, was it Dr. Sandra Williams? This is like 10 years ago. I really was convinced that, okay, we better avoid sugar when treating cancer. So, and also during my course with Dr. Longo, he focused on glucose and how that activates IGF-1, these pro-aging pathways. So most of what I read and learned was alluding to the fact that sugar feeds cancer cells. So how true is this in your experience?
So again, that's one of my half truths there. Like, yep, sugar feeds cancer. They'll use glucose as a fuel source, just like they're going to use amino acids to make the enzymes and receptors that it needs, just like it needs fats for the cell membranes and needs vitamin C. Like it needs all the same nutrients that our other cells need. It's actually just taking up more because they are dividing more quickly. So they are using more fuel. And a lot of people like to reference PET scans or what are done. And someone gets radio labeled glucose, and then you see where that glucose lights up, and then that's where the cancer cells are, where you can identify the tumor. And so then people like to use this as, see, cancer uses glucose. It's like, yep, you'll also see the kidneys light up, and you'll see the brain light up because those are also cells that are taking up glucose. Just that part is taking up it at a very fast rate because it is dividing very quickly. So
Mhm.
it's one of those half truths, but again, we have also seen that there are some cancer cells that love glutamine, an amino acid, and it gets its fuel through putting that into the TCA cycle and getting energy that way. Again, adding this complexity of different cancer cells are relying a little bit more on different metabolic fuels. It's really challenging to selectively starve it because it's going to get the fuel that it needs. But when I argue that, and people are like, well, then you say everyone can eat sugar. I'm like, that's not what I'm saying at all. I think everybody, whether you have cancer or not, should be limiting refined sugars from their diet. We know that that's not great in our diet. So I definitely try to encourage people choosing carbohydrates that are coming from whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, where we're also getting fiber.
Mm.
And as I kind of referenced earlier, that fiber has been associated with reduced risk of cancer, as well as now we're seeing potentially impacting response to therapy associated with fiber intakes.
So if somebody's trying to lower sugar and glucose in general, would that mean also to limit their intake of pasta and bread and rice, potatoes, these things that convert into sugars in the body?
Mhm. Yeah, so we definitely want to look at, I don't want to encourage someone to just sit down to a bowl of pasta with nothing else, but no veggies, no protein coupled with that. Then we also look at what those foods are consumed with are going to impact how that's digested, how it's absorbed, how quickly we're going to see that glucose rise and insulin with it. So trying to make sure that we're pairing our carbohydrates with a source of protein, healthy fats. I tell people if you want something a little more simple carbohydrate, maybe that's a great time to have it around your exercise sessions. Your muscle definitely wants to use that glucose. It's a big tank. It can take up that glucose and maybe take it up before the cancer cells get a whole lot of availability for it. Because another thing that we've seen in cancer, like one of the most common side effects is fatigue. And a lot of that's related to the muscle. So we want to make sure that the muscle's getting the fuel that it needs. Otherwise, fatigue is going to be much worse too.
Then that makes, so if somebody wants to get an idea of that, what that would look like, I would say perhaps after your gym workout would be probably the time to have your bowl of pasta, if you love that, with a bunch of veggies, any kind of veggies, I don't know, spinach and peas and onions and garlic and and then just try to pair those higher fiber foods, not just the plain bowl of pasta with cream sauce. Do you have, or would that be correct, or do you have a better idea?
Yeah. Yeah, I would love that for someone to like, let's use this as an opportunity to add in some more fiber, get that good protein source in there, maybe some healthy fats, like using some olive oil basting. But again, if someone's like really dealing with a lot of nausea, maybe that's all they can get down is just plain, boring pasta. Well, okay,
Mm.
then
Mm.
then we'll let that be a source of fuel, because I always want to balance that too with understanding that if then you're like so hyped up, you're like, well, I can't tolerate proteins right now. And if I know I have fat, that's going to trigger diarrhea, then I just won't eat this. Then the body's tapping into your fuel sources, including your muscle, to
Mm.
provide that fuel and kind
Yeah.
of bring it back to that. We don't want this to also then trigger malnutrition or contribute to malnutrition.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And on top of your pasta dish, probably put a bit of protein in there, a little bit of chicken or fish or other plant protein. That then, so having a loss of appetite, is that very common with people who have cancer, or is it just when they're going through the treatments, or is it just a smaller population?
Yeah, it definitely varies about how people experience their therapies as well. Like, I had like one patient who just cruised through no problem, going on with their day-to-day life, versus I have people who get hospitalized for the severity of their side effects. But loss of appetite is often a common and be trigger for some of the weight loss that led them to seek a diagnosis. Many of these therapies can lead to loss of appetite. Also because there's just so many other side effects that they're dealing with. Like, think of when you've ever had a cold or a fever, when you have that amount of inflammation and stress in the body, you're not really thinking about eating. You're eating because you know you need to, but you just don't feel well.
Hmm.
And many of these things like constipation or diarrhea, it's like, well, I don't want to eat, and then make my diarrhea worse. And mental stress related to it as well. Or I often see with fatigue, it's like, well, I'm hungry, but I don't have the energy to cook something, so I'll just lay here. So fatigue is one of those contributors, but loss of appetite, it doesn't happen in all people. I did a recent post about weight loss, and people are like, I gained weight during treatment, that many are put on steroids, and that is going to increase appetite. So just an example there, like everyone's therapy is different, how they're experiencing side effects is different, but that is really a big challenge.
Is there I don't know, an order, say somebody has no appetite and they really know they should eat, and they have their, imagine a piece of salmon, a bit of broccoli and some potatoes, proteins, carbs, and vegetables and fiber, and drizzled with olive oil, for example. There's oil, is healthy fats in the salmon, let's say. Is there an order where they should, if they can only get like one bite or a couple of bites, where would you say they should start?
I like to prioritize protein. That is definitely something we know people need a little bit more of. And then also usually those protein sources might provide a little more calories as well. But the carbs are just not going to give a whole lot of calories generally. They're not. And then that also can't be converted into protein that the body needs. So, but I also tell people, it doesn't matter how much protein drink, or, you have a couple of protein drinks that day, but you didn't get enough calories. Well, then that protein was used for fuel. It was not used to help maintain your muscle that you needed to maintain that day. So foundation, we got to get those calories in.
Good. Okay. Well, a piece of salmon would be good. Got fats and proteins in there.
Oh yeah. That would be a great priority.
Going
and
back
usually
to
well tolerated.
What?
But usually well tolerated too, because it's like a nice flaky fish.
Going back to the sugars, there's also a lot of chatter about artificial sweeteners like aspartame or sucralose. What are your thoughts about that in cancer?
So there has been, I know like a recent study came out, it was that last year, that found an increased risk of cancer with a couple of these artificial sweeteners. I believe it was aspartame and sucralose. There has been also a large body of evidence that has not identified an association with cancer risk. And it's really hard to tease out where that risk is coming from. Oh, another one that came out that got a lot of attention was that in a petri dish, they were putting sucralose, very high doses of sucralose acetate, like a derivative product, and saw that it caused DNA damage on a petri dish at very high doses. And so that got people scared about sucralose. I just want to start off saying, like, I'm not encouraging everyone should be having artificial sweeteners. It's all okay. I think it's definitely something that we should be trying to limit in our diet. I mean, what are they used for? Essentially, are going to be processed foods, which we know for cancer prevention guidelines are to limit in the diet, essentially. So if you're following that cancer prevention guideline, you're likely not getting a lot of these artificial sweeteners in the diet. And the one study that did show this association, what was interesting is like it didn't seem like a dose response of it. So that made it a little questionable about, well, is it really, or was it just something found in this data? Because observational, just a lot of limitations with our observational data. So what I give people for guidance is we should be trying to limit them from our diet. You should not be drinking 4 Diet Cokes in a day. We should really be trying to drink more water anyway, or not having these artificially sweetened yogurt. Like, could we do a plain Greek yogurt where we use fruit as your sweetener and have natural, whole foods in the diet is what I really try to encourage. But also balance that with like having a diet soda is not going to cause your cancer to come back. It is not going to give you cancer when you're including those in moderation.
Great advice. So the next question I have is about a woman going through menopause. And this is a little bit off the track of nutrition, but maybe you have thoughts on it anyways. We hear about hormone therapy causing cancer or increasing our cancer risk. Do you have any information on that?
Right. With the Women's Health Initiative, that was a study with some early concerns about that increasing the risk of some cancers. There's been even more longer term follow-up. Might actually find that estrogen alone might be protective against some cancers. This is not well within my realm, but this is, again, that example about how this needs to be a bigger conversation. It's not like, oh, my friend's using hormone replacement therapy, I should. It should be a conversation with your provider about what are your symptoms, what is the safe dose for you to start, what is your family history of cancers, what are concerns, because that's just an example of how you always have to outweigh these risks and benefits and have this bigger conversation with your provider about what's best for you. And with that research, just that's pretty much what it came down to, is that this needs to be a personalized decision with people and to outweigh what are the risks of this particular therapy versus the benefits for that individual.
What about the women who worry about the estrogen? Because that's what we're afraid of when we talk about hormone therapy, but there's also phytoestrogens, such as in soy. And you mentioned soy and tofu and edamame. These are being foods that you would encourage people to be eating. So imagine, so is soy really bad for a woman going through menopause if they want to lower their risk of cancer? And what if you already have cancer or when in remission? Your thoughts on soy? Is it okay for everyone?
Yeah, so that's been one that, again, back to the animal studies, is that there was a lot of fear about soy because of those phytoestrogens. Like, okay, this could bind to an estrogen receptor and stimulate growth of estrogen sensitive cells. Now, those early animal studies were done at using isolated compounds, very high doses, which is not what someone would be getting from their diet from soy foods. So yes, concentrated amounts at high doses could be having more of a pharmaceutical type of effect, right? Toxicological effect. When we look at our observational research, again, over many different populations, have found that soy consumption, soy food consumption, has been associated with a reduced risk of breast cancer. And that those with breast cancer, if anything, has been shown to be protective. And a recent continuous update project and reevaluating the research has found that for those that have had breast cancer, that soy isoflavone intake, coupled with, again, that's a marker of soy food intake, associated with a reduced risk of recurrence. So soy has been shown to be protective both before, during, and after cancer.
Amazing how the science has changed, and the same for estrogen and in hormone therapy as well. And we're hearing all the benefits that happen when we are balancing our hormones or getting the foods that are helpful to our hormonal fluctuations. So this is amazing.
Yeah.
This is what I also heard. I think it was Dr. William Lee, I think, and what foods to eat to lower risk of cancer. I can't remember what the book was called, but I remember number one was soy. And it's just, again, a surprise considering for years, if not decades, we've been hearing about soy and don't eat soy. And it's really a good choice for, I guess, people who want to lower the consumption of animal proteins, and that gives you a big bang for your buck in terms of getting any kind of soy. And we're talking about not buying this frozen soy burgers in the frozen food section. We're talking more about just getting that plain block of tofu or edamame beans or something like that. Is that correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying about that, because there has been like, oh, plant-based, and what came out, Beyond Burgers and hot dogs made of soy protein isolate. Like, that is not the same thing as eating a whole soy food. Those are very different types of products. So we definitely want to encourage the whole soy food, soy milk, tofu, tempeh, miso, edamame. Those are all great things to include in the diet. And yes, soy with breast cancer, also soy. My dissertation research is actually with soy and prostate cancer. There's been a lot of research in that area too. So it actually has been shown to be pretty protective and has been villainized. And unfortunately, this is one myth that I just, along with the sugar feeds cancer, the being afraid of soy, just it really, that is so pervasive, and it's really hard to make people not scared of it. Like, no, this is something you should be trying to include in your diet.
Have you heard of Dr. Stephen Gundry and his research and books all about lectins, Lectins, lectins. And a lot of people haven't heard of this. And what he proposes, this is a toxin in plants, and they're very high in beans, lentils, wheat, nightshades, which are tomatoes, red peppers, and things that I just absolutely love. And I'm wondering then, in soy and soybeans as well, do you understand the conflict of somebody who may be reading these books and go, oh, maybe I should, have cancer and I should be eating this, but yet what about the lectins?
Yeah, lectins are something that there's actually very little left in a cooked product. Yes, for beans, it can be high, but you are soaking the beans or cooking the beans, lectins are removed. And I think that's another example there that there's like a lot of fear about this. And there's one person saying this, but what does the large body of evidence over many decades, over many populations have consistently shown? That incorporation of beans, legumes, all these different plant foods that you discussed there have been associated with reduced risk, not only of cancer, but many other chronic diseases, which would, in his mind, be high lectin. Why are we consistently seeing something different? And what kind of bothers me about the way that he talks about it is like, well, he's been generating lots of money creating this fear about lectins. Where's the research to support that hypothesis? And how does that stack against all of this other? If this is something you truly believe we should be concerned about, I think that there should be investment in the research to show that that is something we should truly be concerned about, because our human evidence that we have now does not support that theory.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to see where this goes. He does propose you prepare them properly through pressure cooking, which is supposed to be different than just cooking. And same thing for cucumbers, you'd peel and deseed them, and that removes the lectin. So there are ways around it. I just was wondering, like, how fearful should we be? Because he calls this, inflammatory foods, when if you just Google these types of foods, it's anti-inflammatory. And there's things you can't pressure cook, like a slice of bread or something, but I'm wondering if when you say these foods are fine, is it okay? Should we really be preparing them, pressure cooking them, or do you think, oh, let's just eat the lentils and not worry about
let's just eat the
cooking?
lentils. Yeah, many people are not even consuming these at all. Any of these beans and lectins in their diet. I mean, really, that is something I've seen. Food that I like to encourage is beans daily or lentils daily, just because, again, high fiber, that type of fiber that really helps support our microbiome. And again, it's always an individual. Like, to bring up the example of like the low FODMAP diet. I've worked with many people on this. Like, I have some people who cannot handle a pear, a single pear. It's like, am I going to tell everybody that pears are bad? No, that sugar alcohol in the pears just does not agree with that individual. And so we've got to individualize that diet. Same thing that kind of came out with like nightshades and arthritis. Like, well, some people think that when they have them, it makes their arthritis worse. Then don't eat them. But plenty of people who eat them and find them to be protective and anti-inflammatory.
Good explanation. We're all bio-individual.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Tell us about your nutrition coaching program or programs. I've seen a lot of them on your website. What are the differences if somebody wants to be coached by you or get information from you? What should they do? What do you offer?
I'm a board certified oncology dietitian, and I'm licensed in Texas, but based on different states, I can practice in other states, and I do virtual one-on-one right now. I don't have any active group coaching going on right now, but I'm working on developing that. I've really been, I started my Instagram account with just trying to combat some of this misinformation, and then just saw the need, and it started growing, got connected to great people like yourself. And so it's me now trying to play catch up about what resources can I provide for people, because something I've also learned is just how much people are not, well, we started off with that, how much information people are not getting that is foundational. And I want to be able to provide that resource. So for now, it's one-on-one. I'm working on stuff that can be a little more universal to help more people. But I really appreciate that opportunity to talk about that, because I do like working one-on-one a little bit more, because as we've talked about, cancer is just so individualized, and it really is hard to generalize some of these things.
If somebody's living in France, can you work with them in another country altogether?
It depends on the country. I've had to look into different countries' laws. When I do group coaching, I can reach out to people from different countries. But what I do is considered medical nutrition therapy. So many areas do require being licensed and regulated, just like a doctor would be, you know.
Mm. Okay, so you just have to look on it a case by case basis. Then I'm going to
Yes.
have to let you go. We've reached the hour. I'm going to have a link to your
Uh,
coaching programs. Yeah. And people can find you on Instagram at Cancer Nutrition HQ. HQ is for headquarters. And I love your website tagline. It's no more, fear less. No, meaning knowledge. And your website is
yeah.
cancernutritionhq.com. Are there anywhere else you'd like to direct people to find you?
No, that's great. My website and my Instagram account, and why I called it HQ is because ultimately I want this to be bigger than me. I want this to be a hub of resources for people. And as my tagline really is setting that foundation that I really want to empower people with information. We started off this conversation about how there's so much misinformation out there. It's really hard to navigate. I really want people to feel empowered to navigate the mess that is out there, and then use that to feel a little more empowered, less fearful around food, and enjoy eating and enjoy their diets.
Oh, thank you so much. Are there any last words for women going through menopause?
Oh, I honestly like the. I think you're also a great reference for that and finding that support system, and know that because this is also an area where I feel like there hasn't been a lot of attention, that there's a lot of misinformation also targeting this population as well. So being skeptical, and then also using your nutrition approach. Like, yes, you want to reduce your risk of cardiovascular disease, these things that come with aging, but also a benefit of many of those recommendations is that they also reduce the risk of many cancers. So you don't need to follow different dietary approaches for that. They all kind of align.
Wonderful. Well, I hope to have you on again. I have many more questions too, and I'm sure my audience does as well. So I have a wonderful day, a good night, good morning if you guys are listening, wherever you are. And hopefully I'll see you again.
Yes, great. Thank you.